Welcome to the CIT network. Today, we are talking about how to have a good conversation. And my guest here in the studio is Bob Tipton. Bob, thanks very much for coming in today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Why don't you give us a brief little overview about you personally, and then we will get into your book.
I'm a writer, I'm a speaker, I'm an author, a consultant. But more than anything, I'm a member of the human race that's trying to find a way for us to be able to be more civil, to have a difference of opinion where it doesn't get personal, where we look for the third way, my way, your way, added together. So I'm focused on changing the conversations, regaining our humanity, finding a way to shift some of the energy that we find in the world. I do that through writing, through speaking, and also through consulting.
Bob's book, What's Right, Not Who's Right. Let's talk about the book a little bit.
Sure.
So you've obviously told us now what motivates you. Mm-hmm. What made you put ink to paper? You thought it was time to write a book like this?
Oh, pastime, actually. One of the things that happened to me, I don't know if this happens to you, I'm sure it's happened to a lot of people that I know, is that conversations at home during the holidays with people that used to be friends, family, they just become very hard anymore. Everything's become pushed into this category, that category. And I just got tired of it, honestly. I got tired of having no toolkit available for people to be able to shift some of the way that they're talking to each other. So as much as it was for me to kind of encapsulate and crystallize some things that were helpful for me, I thought it might be helpful for others to be able to do the same thing. Because frankly, we're losing, maybe even lost our humanity in many ways. And that's stopping us from moving forward together as a people. So it was a response to the negative energy that just pouring out of the world. Let's find a different approach. So here's some tools.
And that's why you put the book together.
That's right.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions. We read through the book, and there were some things that really sort of like gelled.
Sure.
Okay?
Sure.
So let's talk about this. What if someone is defending a position or a party instead of seeking as much factual information? Because what seems to be happening today is that people are just watching a news program and believing it blindly.
Right. So we're suffering a bit from confirmation bias. That's the term. And what happens there is I have a position. I have a set of beliefs. I have something that I have that I own. And in that, I am looking for any shred of evidence to prove that I'm right. Even in the mountains of evidence telling me that I'm not right, there's all kinds of data out there that says maybe my perspective needs to be changed or shifted. I'm holding on to the fact that I found something that correlates with my way of looking at the world.
So really, it's interesting because I've never heard it explained that way. So basically, it's exactly how you put together a conspiracy theory. Grab the little facts that you want, ignore the rest, and let's make those the truth.
Yeah, and what we're also, what's happening right now too, is that there's a certain percentage of the population that just is not curious. And if you look at psychology, that's been true forever. There's a certain percentage of the population that are highly influenceable. Well, the reality is that's all you need right now in order to make major shifts in policy or party for that matter. There's a movie, it's a great movie, it's a documentary actually called The Big Hack. And it talks about the Cambridge Analytica role in the 2016 elections. Now, wherever you line up, whatever party you're part of, you know, I come from an IT background, a technology background, so I was fascinated to understand what actually occurred. All it took to shift the election in 2016 in the United States was 70,000 people in 3 states.
Yes.
That's all that it took. So looking for highly influenceable individuals with enough connection to what they believe and having them build a viewpoint, that's defending a position. That is putting something forward that may not be in the category of what's right, very much in the category of who's right.
What kind of energy do you bring to the conversation? Our energy is under our control every time. So how do we try and remember this?
Yeah, so it means that we need to be aware and awake and understand the energy that belongs to us. So I'm actually writing an article about this right now. It's this notion of how powerful intention is. And what we bring to a circumstance intentionally is under our control. So I get into the work that I do as a consultant, and we've got people that are contending with each other, and they're going back and forth on things, and they get upset, they get angry, and they point at the other person and say, well, you made me feel, you caused me to. And it's like, no, wait a second. Your choice is to behave that way or to feel that way. No one can, it's an old saying, I'm sure you heard this as a child too, no one can make you feel anything without your permission.
Right.
But let's remember that. So all it takes is about 1/10 of a second for the process to go all the way through the prefrontal cortex of our brain, where we have all of our high order functions, all of our decision making. Instead of reacting based upon our alligator brain, the amygdala inside of our brain, where it's fight or flight or just shut down, that's something else we're adding. Let's add a third or fourth option, which is consider the situation. Decide what your reaction could or should be, as opposed to just reacting to things. So I kind of have a rule when it comes to things like responding to emails and text messages. If it's really inflammatory, wait 2 hours.
I like that.
And what happens there is you're adrenalized when it shows up. In 2 hours, your body has processed the adrenaline.
Yeah.
You now have the ability to be rational in your response. If it's something that's huge, a major decision, life-changing decision, wait 2 days before you make a decision. That gives you the opportunity to sleep on it a couple of times and really consider different options. So we are in control of our reactions always. Not just sometimes, always. You know, I get back to Viktor Frankl. He was a psychologist or psychiatrist, I can't remember. He wrote a book in a concentration camp in the Second World War. And he decided, it's called A Man's Search for Meaning, and he decided he was in control of his reactions in every circumstance. That's the only thing that they couldn't take from him. So, intentionality. When you walk into a situation where there's likely to be conflict, what energy do you choose to bring? Curious, open, positive, optimistic, or do you walk into the circumstance confrontational right from the start? It's our choice.
It's interesting you should mention that, because when I was working here in town, a couple of our managers were Russian, born and bred, and had come over when the Cold War ended.
Right.
And the way that they looked at things was so different from the way that we looked at things. And it's as if they have been brought up to always be confrontational.
Right.
As if it was the only way they could win an argument.
Yep. We've become a global society, a global culture. As much as the nationalists would like us not to be, the reality is we all share the same blue ball in space, and borders and barriers are human constructions. So we are more and more and more connected to each other all the time. So here's another one, back to your original question about not defending a position. Let's look for common interests instead. So common interests are, we want to have a quality of life. We want to be able to have a pursuit of happiness. We'd like to be able to feel like we belong and we're meaningful and all those things. Every human being on earth shares those.
Yes.
So if we can get back to that, that's important. However, what we tend to do is to minimize somebody else's opinion right from the start. If we want people to value our opinion and our perspective, the first thing that we need to do is to recognize that they are entitled to their opinion and their perspective. Research shows that people actually think you're smarter if you give the other person the benefit of validating that they're entitled to an opinion. You're more understanding. The relationship changes right away, but what happens is we tend not to do that. So other cultures, it's much more confrontational. We have, here in the benefit of the United States, is most of us don't have to worry about being safe on a daily basis. We don't have to worry about the government or the military coming and doing something to us. We just don't. Other parts of the world, that's not the case. They live in daily concern of how they might be perceived. So that's called impression management, and we can get into that later, where you're constantly making sure that you're putting the right impression into the world. That's where some of that confrontation can come into.
Oh, that's interesting, because that sort of leads us to, I mean, everyone has a story to tell.
Yeah.
Everybody.
That's right.
How do you get them to tell their story?
It's hard to do. Let me give you kind of an example of how we assume about other people's stories when we may not be kind. So here we are at a stoplight, and the person in front of you doesn't just take off in microseconds after the light turns green. They sit there, and you're going through in your mind the story. Well, they're on their phone, or they're texting, or they're in Facebook, or maybe they just left the doctor where they got a diagnosis of cancer. Maybe they just found out that their mother or father passed away. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where instead of projecting what we think their story is on top of them, it's stopping ourselves from doing that and recognizing maybe they do have a story. And then when you are in an opportunity where you're in a conversation, a dialogue with somebody, asking questions that are not threatening or judgmental. Wherever you line up on the political spectrum, it's help me understand. In fact, the first year after the 2016 election, I put on Facebook every day a question with the hashtag help me understand. And some of them were just silly, like why do so many people back into parking spaces now? Well, we have backup cameras, we have large vehicles, you get out of the parking space faster. I mean, it's a simple sort of thing, but then help me understand how people feel about things like public transportation. I had a person who was a very, very conservative Jewish man, and right after him, a very liberal, forward-leaning Islamic woman comment on the same post saying neither one of them liked the subway system in New York City, and they had very specific things to say about it. When you open it up with an open-ended question like, help me understand, tell me more about that, it seems like you are, as opposed to, why do you always, how come you never? What that does is it pushes people into conflict right away.
The trouble is, people are so judgmental. They just judge everybody. There are some certain people that just, that's all they can do. It seems, or rather, it seems that's all they can do.
That's right.
Which tells me that they have no time to love anybody.
Right.
Because they're just judging. What are your feelings about that?
Yeah, so that's kind of based on a quote from Mother Teresa. If you spend all your time judging people, you have no time left to love them.
Okay.
And let's turn that internally. So one of the things that I find regularly with people is they tend to judge themselves more harshly than anyone else they might judge on the outside. So when I have a conversation with someone who's feeling very, very judgmental, there's something inside of them that's unprocessed. There's some perspective about the way they feel about themselves that they're projecting. So one of the things that I remember is that it's a statement about them, not a statement about me. So I don't have to react to it. It's a little bit like a light switch on the wall where you take the wiring and disconnect it. So my younger daughter, and I'm sure she'll be watching this at some point, she had built a very carefully constructed explode dad button. Right? And she would have things that she would say, and she would walk up and push the button, and sure enough, I would react. Well, I got to the point where that just wasn't healthy anymore. What I wanted to do instead of reacting was to love her, and I wasn't in a place to do that. So I uncoupled the wiring, so she pushed it. Well, that really frustrated because she didn't get the reaction that she was looking for. But I kept my composure. I kept my space. I kept myself in a space where I was able to love her through her challenges. Now, I have 4 children. All of them have challenges. I'm telling that story about one of them. And I guess the place where I get to is that I hope people love me through my imperfections as well. My need for guidance and coaching and support. The more we're open to be able to love each other, and you may think I'm weird about this, Nigel, I don't know, but I actually tell my clients that I love them. I tell the people that work with me and for me that I love them. It's an HR appropriate kind of way for sure, but it's this notion that I am bringing very, very positive, very loving energy to the work that I do, whether it's with my staff or whether it's with my clients. I think that's an important thing to remember.
I have a daughter who will also be watching this at some time, who was exactly the same way, and it always amazed me as a dad how one minute she could be in your face shouting her head off because you have passed a rule that she hated.
Sure.
And she could stomp off to her bedroom and 30 seconds later come wandering out, "Daddy, can I borrow $20, please?"
Yep.
It always amazed me how and it seems to be, and this is not a sexist comment, but it always seemed to be the girls that could do it, not the boys.
Yeah, well, I've got 2 of each, so they both kind of did it with me. But,
I've got 2 girls, 1 boy.
Okay.
And my son never did that.
Well, part of it also, just frankly, I think that we save some of our most negative energy for the people that we trust the most. Mm-hmm. It's weird that we will behave so badly in front of people that we love the most because they're not going to run away from us. And sometimes we just need to get the energy out in such a way that we help ourselves heal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the essence of this book, too, is that it's about healing our relationships. And we do that by seeing the humanity in each other. I can vehemently disagree with you about something, and I can still see your humanity. And by the way, by seeing your humanity, it in no way diminishes mine.
At all.
In fact, what it does is a little bit like one candle lighting another loses nothing.
Right.
The energy grows when we do that. So if I was to give people a piece of advice to help them have a great conversation or even a good conversation, let's just start with the fact that you are a human being and so am I. And let's recognize each other's humanity. Let's use that as the common interest that we use to describe things back and forth.
Right.
Everything changes.
It's funny you should mention that because back in the 80s, I was doing worldwide support for the company I was working with. So I flew everywhere.
Okay.
One thing I discovered very quickly was when you spoke to the normal denizens of a country, everyone has the same fears, the same worries. You could take anyone from any country and put them in any other country and it would be exactly the same.
That's right.
Because everyone has exactly the same issues, problems, dreams, fantasies across the world.
Yes.
And it's not until you start going up the ladder
to those that want to control things.
To those that want to control things where it changes.
Or build conspiracy theories.
Right. And of course, they are often so addicted to being correct.
That's right. That's right.
Instead of being connected. Obviously, it's got to be a makeup in the brain.
Well, yeah, and part of it is deficit thinking. It's scarcity thinking, that somehow I give something up by being in connection with you. So, you know, I told you I have a bit of a technology background, and studies also, research is showing that the more connection that we have through social media, the less connection we have as human beings, and we're wired for connection.
Yes.
You know, Brene Brown is one of my favorite writers, and she talks about this regularly. It's this notion that we are wired as social creatures to be connected with each other like this, face to face across the table from each other, not through commenting and liking and reposting things on social media.
Well, I mean, it goes right the way back to the tribe aspect.
Sure.
Before language had become fully developed, we still had to rely on each other as a group, as a tribe, whatever you want to call it, to survive.
That's right. Extend that, we'll actually eliminate that through barriers. We're now sitting in our basements, we're behind our phones, we're doing a variety of things and connecting with each other that way. The problem is we're not really connecting, we're not satisfying that. So one of the groups that I've worked with over the years, I talk about it in the book, it's a group called Building Bridges that's based here in Denver. And over the last 20 plus years, they've focused on one of the most intractable areas in the world about being correct. And that has to do with the Middle East, Palestine and Israel in particular. And what this group does every year is they bring a group of high school girls, typically they're the 15, 16 kind of age range. They bring them to various places around the world. They did it here in the mountains of Colorado for many, many years. And they go through a 2-week intensive program. Well, these girls are wired by their families, by history, by their religion, by the politics that they find themselves in, to be enemies, to hate each other. I mean, it's just built into them. One of the first things they do when they come together is they put their finger on each other's carotid artery. They actually reach across and touch
each
the
other.
enemy and feel the blood coursing through the other person's body. Well, I get goosebumps thinking about witnessing that, and it goes on from there. Well, it's not about peacemaking. It's not about normalizing. It's not about politics. It's about seeing and feeling the humanity and being connected literally with someone that you look at as the other. One quick story that's also in here too, and that has to do with the Good Samaritan story. We've completely missed the meaning associated with it. In the first century Judea, there was no such thing as a good Samaritan to a Jew.
Right.
that was the opposite, the antithesis, the
Yes.
absolute 180 degrees view. It's the equivalent of an ISIS fighter or KKK member, or you fill in the blank. That's who stopped. The people from that person's tribe.
Take him to the inn,
All of
and
that.
to pay for his first room,
All of
and
that.
all of that. Yes. So the important thing for someone is to always be curious,
Yep.
be open,
Yep.
be positive. Because even if you're hearing stuff that you don't want to listen to, if you are positive about listening, you can then open up the conversation. Am I right? Am I wrong?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up one of the words you had for sure, and that's to be curious.
Yes.
We need time to be curious. We need to have a sense that we're okay as people to be curious. If I'm open to experiencing somebody else's viewpoint, that means I need to have some level of comfort and confidence in my own. I also need to be open enough, another word, one of the words that you used, it's like a full balloon can accept no more air. So I have to let some of the air out of my own balloon to be able to consider whether I want to add air from somebody else's balloon. It's a metaphor that I remember, because if I don't, what happens is I try to put something else in, it will pop. So I need to be kind of flexible and fungible and adaptable and resilient as well. And realize the older I get, the less I know that I know anything. The more I realize that I've probably been at least misguided, but maybe outright wrong about a number of things. So let go. You know, the positivity, that means that I'm interested in a better outcome. I'm interested in learning. I'm interested in being curious. I can still be negative. I can still disagree. But I'm going to listen through a different filter when I'm curious about what you're saying, and I'm open to take a look at my own ideas.
It's kind of funny, actually, because when I was working stiff, there was one of the members of our team, and I always got on very well with him. We had a lot of common interests, but he was at one end of the political realm, and I was at the other end of the political realm.
Sure.
So we tried not to talk too much about politics, but whenever we did talk about politics, it would always be, well, Nigel, you need to go and prove what you've just said.
Right.
Well, no, Ken, why don't you go and disprove what I've... No.
Right.
And it was impossible to have a full conversation to discuss these points, because he'd always throw that back at you.
Yeah, so this can get maybe a little weird, if you don't mind me getting weird for just a second.
Get as weird as you wish.
So there are different realms where processes and approaches to decision-making and communication exist. The realm of belief is not supported by the realm of facts. So the challenge is that we try to span the two. And one of the issues when you're dealing with ideology and you're dealing with dogma and you're dealing with beliefs is facts don't help. And a typical response for someone who wants to live in the factual realm and they run across somebody who's living in the belief realm is they think more facts is the path to getting understanding. In fact, it is not.
Right.
The place to start is to realize that you're having this cross-wiring between these two different realms of trying to make decisions. We're really terrible at that. We default to what we prefer, and we just think the other person is the problem. So, again, another one of the quotes in the book, or the story in the book, is we get into this notion that if you run across somebody who doesn't agree with you, the first thing you say is, well, you're ignorant. You don't have the information. So I'm going to give you the information. Well, they still don't agree with you. Well, they have the information and don't agree with you. Well, then they're just stupid. Well, it doesn't end there.
No.
If they have the information, they understand the information, and they don't agree with you, well, then they're evil. And this is the progression that we see in social media every day.
And some people miss out steps 1 and 2.
Yeah, they go straight to the evil. You're right.
They go straight to 3.
But that's where we're dealing with dogma. That's where we're dealing with belief, as opposed to dealing with facts. It's like science. I don't care how you feel about science. Science is.
End of story.
End of story. There's no belief about it. But when people believe that there's something that they can look at related to science and have a perspective or an opinion about it, it's like, wait a second, we're cross-realm communicating. So what's the basis for your belief to say that you're going to not listen to the science? What is that?
Right.
Right.
I can remember having an argument with someone down at the old Cheers here in town, and All I said, okay, so you don't want to believe in the basics of science and what it's done for the world. Look around you. Everything.
Right.
Everything in this room is based from science. And some people are unable to grasp this fact that we live in science.
Yeah.
We drive in science. We fly in science. We go to the moon in science.
Yes, and it's not everything, right? So that's where we start getting into some challenges of cross-realm as well. So show me the formula for love. Mm-hmm. Show me the formula for optimism and hope. Show me the formula for joy. Tell me where consciousness comes from. Give me the factual basis of that.
Yes.
And we struggle because science doesn't have the answer for everything. I mean, it's even some basic things, like science doesn't know why a seed germinates. It knows that it does, and you can predict it, but it doesn't know why it happens. Mm-hmm. So we just fill in the blank. If you look at only one realm, only one viewpoint, what you've just done is limit your ability to experience the richness, the depth, the beauty, the amazing thing called the universe. And I think it was Walter Heisenberg that said, the universe is stranger than we imagine. And he said, no, it's stranger than we can imagine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quite often that argument is used, well, they don't know how a seed germinates. Mm-hmm. We don't know today.
Correct.
That does not mean we won't know tomorrow.
Sure.
Look at what we knew just 50 years ago.
Right.
Look at what we knew just 100 years ago. Look how much we've learnt in that 100 years.
That's right. Right. And keep in mind that the growth towards mindfulness is also happening. This nurturing of the spirit is happening simultaneously with more and more science.
Yes.
More disconnection through technology and media is leading to a desire for people to feel more connected to others, to nature.
That's correct.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing, and you can't just write a small book and have all the wisdom associated with all of this, but there are some basic things included.
So, what's right, not who's right. Great book, great book. Bob, any closing comment?
We can do this as a people. We can change our conversations. We can regain our humanity. We can manage our energy. We can be curious. We can find a way to help people tell their story by telling our stories. It is possible. There's a lot that I've heard from people saying, we're just doomed, we're done. And I don't agree with that at all. I think that some people think that we're just lost as a people and it'll take decades potentially to come back. I don't believe that either. I think the process is simple. It's just not easy. Let's start with the desire to focus on what's right and move away from who's right. Let's take that energy into the conversations we have. I see it happen all the time in my life, but I attract this kind of energy around me. I think it's possible for all of us to do it.
Only if people want to.
That's right.
And that's the tough part.
Yep.
Bob, thank you so much for coming into the CIT network and having this conversation. I desperately hope we can get you back because I know we could talk for another hour without any trouble whatsoever.
I agree. Thanks, Nigel.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching the CIT network. Once again, go and buy this book. You will not be disappointed. Thank you.